All right. Good evening, everyone. Hope you're all well. Second session. This one is a design and training session for grassroots football. So, same as last week, rules. So make sure you've got your mic on mute so there's no background noise. Make sure everyone can hear as we go. Session will be recorded and put onto YouTube channel tomorrow, same as last week's one. And as before, take as many notes, video or photo as you want to do as we go through. And we'll have a question time at the end. So any questions you want to throw out in an open forum or drop them in the chat room if it's anything about the content that we've been going through this evening. And we'll go through the chat room, keep that open as we go through. So if there's anything urgent that you've been confused by or want us to revisit, then we can come back to it. So just quick intro about myself. Good to see so many of the same names and same faces back from last week. We didn't scare you away. Just for the new people coming on, my name is Dan Shepherd. I'm the TD Head of Football at Hills Football Association. Currently hold an A license as well as a C license, instructor and assessor, as well as delivering all the community certificates in the Hills Association as well. Had a very minor sort of playing background, but my highest level was at Stevenage Football Club in Football League 2 in England. Released under 19s, played around semi-pro and university football. My coaching experience, I've coached males, females, and everything in between. Started with 2-year-olds, done over 60s, disabilities, grassroots, MPL, brief A-League environment, and brief Centre of Excellence in England as well. School football, pretty much covered most of it as we go from there. I'm also very pleased to announce that tonight for our webinar as well, Warren Grieve is joining us. Warren, if you want to come on and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. First of all, thanks to Dan and Hills for the invite this evening. I hope that everyone's keeping safe in yet another tough time for us all. And again, a unique opportunity, I guess, to be able to deliver these types of workshops, which certainly have become more and more common practice in our day-to-day lives, certainly since the last time we went into lockdown with the COVID situation and then into this second lockdown. And fantastic to see the amount of engagement from the greater football community and certainly from an association point of view, linking back into the member federation at Football New South Wales. I've been the technical director now at Football New South Wales, coming up to 3 years at the end of this week, believe it or not. Prior to that, I've held various roles, which I won't bore you with tonight, but have been fortunate enough to sort of apply my trades around the world across several countries, here in Australia, around several states and territories, and been involved in full-time football for 20 plus years, and thoroughly grateful for the position that I'm currently in and allowing me to develop myself as an individual. So even these types of workshops are a huge learning opportunity for myself, not for me to try to pass on what I've experienced in the environments that I've worked in, but also to hear from yourselves and what you might be experiencing in the environments that you're currently coaching in, depending on where you're at and the level you're actually coaching at. Our jobs is to try and support you moving forwards and just to try to give you some more hints and tips. And I'm hoping that tonight will also give me an opportunity to learn from yourselves, like I say, and certainly from Dan. I've been fortunate enough to have a very good working relationship with Dan over the course of many years. Much like Dan, I'm also proud to say that I've had a stint at Stevenage, both in a TD or an academy capacity, running the academy, the assistant manager at the academy there, and then also playing for them as a youth player and doing my my YTS youth training scheme with Stevenage also. So it's interesting how you have these moments where you come to the other side of the world and you bump into someone that's had quite a similar journey as yourself. But certainly looking forward to tonight's session. And like I say, feel free to ask as many questions as you want, and I'll try and be as open and transparent as possible as we move throughout the evening. So thanks, Dan.
Cheers, Warren. We probably live further away from each other right now in Sydney than we did in Stevenage without knowing it.
Yeah, exactly right.
All right, we'll push on. All right, we've got a video coming up.
課長のフォームって妙にコンパクトですよね。
だな。なんでだろう。
ああ、いった。
So just a nice intro really for us about coaching and thinking about the behaviours that we're trying to encourage of players and reinforcing not only skills but behaviours and attitudes, and making sure that what we practice is what we're going to go out and deliver, and making sure that we set something up for long term. So agenda for this evening. Obviously, session topic is about designing training sessions, but we're going to give you a bit of a background first of all of what and why through the Football Australia building blocks, and then into training components, the actual session design, and what's is sort of relevant, and some training essentials, and then lastly the So Change It, which anyone that's done a community course, definitely within Hills, but should be wider than that, should be very familiar with the So Change It anyway, but it's always a good refresher. Was you want to take the lead on this one?
Yeah, so when speaking with Dan, when we were looking at delivering this type of workshop and the content that is put in place, we decided that we'll sort of co-deliver this. And again, Dan, feel free to jump in, but at any point. Again, we've sort of alluded to my background in terms of working with Football New South Wales for the last 3 years, but have been incredibly fortunate to also hold roles in the ACT, and having worked and still do some work in a coach development capacity with the FA right now. So I've seen the evolution of the coaching process in particular. Today, I still find the coaching process one of the most valuable tools you can actually have as a coach, as a resource. It is designed as a resource and an opportunity for coaches at every level to understand, depending on the age and stage that they're actually working in, what's the types of learning environments they can actually create within each of the ages. I think one of the big misconceptions is that throughout each of these building blocks, once you are a child and you've completed, or you move out from 8 to 9 to 10 to 11, you're moving out of a building block into a new phase, that your learning still stops once you've finished that phase. And I think it's important to say this, that your learning never stops. So even if you get to the performance phase, and we're hoping that you're being polished off and handed to the head coach and ready to go, because you're armed with all the tools that are required at the top level in that performance phase, you're still going to develop yourself individually, certainly from a skill acquisition perspective, on your individual technique, and you're still going to look to develop yourself as an individual. And when I say develop yourself as an individual, as a player, in the game training phase, when you put it into the team orientation. So this is designed as a pathway for players to actually move through discovery phase into the skill acquisition phase, all the way through to the performance phase. And the line at the top there obviously shows the age brackets that these particular blocks fall into, but it's continued learning all the way through. And you would, as coaches, I guess, is charged with, certainly from this aspect, more community focus would be around the discovery phase and the skill acquisition phase. And I think most importantly, certainly from a discovery phase perspective, and even in the skill acquisition phase, fun has to be the most important element of your training session. Not just fun for the the players themselves and the environment that you create through playing a games format, but also for yourself as a coach to be prepared to put something on, but for yourself to enjoy it. Because I think if we enjoy it as coaches when we're actually delivering the session, that then comes out with our personalities, and hopefully then the players are more engaged and they become not only engaged but fall in love with the game. So these are great blocks for me moving through. Depending where you are around the world, the common trend now is to follow a similar sort of approach, and the terminology might be slightly different depending on where you are around the world. But these are certainly something that here in Australia we hold as core to understanding the age and stage of the players that you're actually working with, the types of environment that you actually want to create for those players, and ensuring that it's fun, engaging, and the players ultimately want to come back, certainly in that discovery phase and skill acquisition phase. As you move through to the performance phase, it's more the pointy end, but I think it's a good illustration. But I think the most important point around this slide is that learning never stops. And like I said before, regardless of whether you're in the game training phase and the performance phase, you're always looking to still develop yourself as individuals technically, develop yourself as a coach to ensure that the sessions are fun, safe, and engaging, like we say.
Agreed. So looking a little bit more in depth about these building blocks, the discovery phase being the first one, being the youngest, in most scenarios, entry into club level football. This is typically your under sixes, under sevens. The emphasis is on, as Warren said, just having fun. We've got to make sure that the players enjoy the game, because at that age group, there's so many choices of other sports that they might want to play, or other interests. That's where we really want to gravitate and make sure we can nurture that, so that when they go home, they're kicking the ball as much as possible. And we mentioned it actually at the start on our chat before we got going about the lack of playing on the street, on the fields, neighbours getting together. Not like we can really do that at the moment anyway, but making the most of this time and trying to, when we're teaching, coaching players in that age group, trying to bring sort of street football back into coaching. It doesn't have to be formal coaching all the time. In terms of a core skill that we would be looking at for players in this age group, or coaches to be focusing with their players in the discovery phase, it's quite simple. It's only first touch and running with the ball. There's a big highlight in world football at the moment about passing and playing tiki-taka, Barcelona, Man City style of football. At this age group of players, you're not going to get that. They're very self-driven, very individual thinkers, very much about how I can score a goal. So add that on top of their technical skill base, the passing isn't really going to come off. And you might have one in a group that's more competent, typically a younger brother or sister that has been kicking the ball with an older sibling at home more often. They might be able to play more passes and strike a ball over a further distance. But the general majority of players, you're going to be looking at how can you control the ball so it doesn't go under your feet, and then how can you run around or run away from the others as quickly as possible with that ball. So you might get 3 touches before that herd of bees just takes over and you just end up on the floor and you don't know where the ball's gone. So just encouraging those moments as much as possible, and try not to bang your head against the brick wall trying to teach them something or get them to do something that they're probably just not going to do because of their age and stage. Moving into the skill app phase.
Yeah, I've taken control of this one at the golden age of motor learning. That's a quote from the Japanese, where we see in this particular age bracket that players are sponges. They absorb the majority of that information, but not only absorb that information, are able to actually retain that information. And I think it's incredibly important when you get into the skill acquisition phase. And I think a lot more emphasis needs to be on this, where technique is prevalent in the sessions that you're actually putting on. And it does have elements, and they will always intertwine. So it doesn't matter whether it's a focus on the session, where it might be first touch. You're always going to get within the session the striking the ball, the running with the ball, and the 1v1. I think, again, if you look at the current curriculum and the coaching process, there's a big misconception that there's no defending when it comes to 1v1. But certainly when you're in a 1v1 situation, there's always one attacker and one defender. You get 2v1s and 3v2. So how do you actually ensure that if your session is a 1v1 session, as an example, even though the focus might be on the attacking player and it might be a specific aspect for them to actually get into the space behind to create a goal scoring opportunity for a teammate, there is that defender as well. So you have to be mindful of the other players that are involved in the practice and how do you actually keep them engaged as well. And that might be through hidden learning. So the rules that you actually put, or the constraints that you actually put on the games, you can be very, very clever with that session design, which will allow the light bulb moments, if you will, for those players to understand, yes, we're working on getting into the space and behind, but how does the defender, through that hidden learning, restrict that opportunity? Where do they show them, depending on how close they are to the attacker, how far away they are, how close they are to either the touch line or the spaces that they're actually working within? And we can be quite clever with our session design. Certainly within this particular phase, there's a couple of ways of actually doing this by having it as an introduction to the session, which is fun, engaging, gets them going, an activation session, ball mastery. So again, I really enjoy doing the ball mastery sessions, picking either first touch striking the ball or one of those core skills. But that introduction is very much working on them as individuals and having elements where there's lots of opportunity for repetition, regardless of which core skill you've actually made or you've taken on for that particular even, or even more so for that week. And then from then going into the actual training component, where you might break it down, but you still want to take a holistic approach and try to keep the game in its entirety as close to as possible if you can. So where technique and developing technique is extremely important in this particular phase, we have to realize that the game itself can at times be the best teacher, and we just facilitate the game with the restrictions that we put into play, and then we allow the players to actually grow within the game, and then they start to make decisions based upon where pressure's coming from, whether that be from in front, from behind, or sideways. And again, how you've actually designed that session will then give you opportunities to actually step in and give a few ideas as to what the players can actually do, or without telling them what to do, can you create an environment whereby you're just challenging them? If pressure comes from in front, where might you place yourself? So being clever with your terminology and how you actually communicate with the players at this particular stage is incredibly important as well. And lastly, if you're taking that approach of skill intro, skill training, and then the skill game at the end, give them opportunity to play the game at the end, because they've worked so hard in the first part of the session. Give them a good chunk of time to actually play the game where it has direction, where it's close to the game as possible. There's goals. I like to think that goals, it doesn't matter whether you're in the discovery phase, skill acquisition phase, game training phase, there's always goals in every single part of the session. Another way to actually do it might be to actually have it as a gig method or a whole method, where you start with a game, do a little bit of coaching in between, and then come back to the game at the end. But having an emphasis on each of the core skills and potentially having a specific aspect that you want to achieve. And ultimately, if you are coaching in this phase, what we should be judging our players on at the weekend is not whether we win or lose, but if we've done a session on one of these core skills, and we've done two sessions on the same core skill, we should be judging the players at the weekend to see what we've actually delivered in our training sessions throughout the week is coming to life at the weekend within the games that are actually being played.
Next one is the game training phase. So what we look at here is, with the slightly older age groups, is working now on the more tactical side of things, understanding, as the title of the phase says, learning about the game, how we're going to train them now, assuming that the players have come through the skill act phase, they've now got the tools of the trade that they can now pass and 1v1 and dribble and all those parts that they need to be able to do. They can now do that, and now you're going to teach them that framework about where, when, and how. Are we going to dribble out the back? Are we going to pass out the back? Are we? What combinations do we want to play? This is when we can start to build in actual team shape. Although you can bring in, if you're playing a 2v2 game in the skill acquisition phase, yes, that's still 1v1 as your core skill, and you might start to give some hidden learning or give some little direction around some being front, being behind, and start to give them some idea or some shape. But this is the age groups where you're going to start looking at, here's my back four, my back three, and this is what they're going to do, and this is how we're going to press, this is what we're going to do in terms of defensive shape. And you're kind of basing your things around these four main moments that you can see in blue. So for those of you that haven't read up on any of this, the BP is ball possession. So that indicates when our team has the ball. BP to BPO is the transition moment from when we had the ball to losing it. So essentially in that, when basically we've been tackled or we've given away a bad pass. BPO is ball possession opponent. So that's when the opposition has the ball. And then the opposite transition. So when we win the ball back off the opposition or they give the ball away. And those are the four main moments that happen within a game all the time. It's just a revolving circle. Ideally, best case scenario, we want to be brilliant at BP, so we never give the ball away and we just control the game forever. But in reality, once you score a goal, the opposition do start with the ball again, unless you're going to retain possession for 45 minutes and score 1-0 on the break of half time. I don't think that's very realistic. So there's going to be moments of all four of those. And how do we set teams up? How do you set your team up? And it's not only what you as a coach believe and understand, but what your players are capable of and the style of play that they're capable of as well. And giving them that little carrot that you don't want to go and teach them something that they're never going to be able to achieve, but you want to be able to put it just in far in front that they've got to work to always try and get to that sort of standard, and always been trying to push themselves to make sure that they're able to compete at the level that they want to and you want to have them competing at as well, without going win crazy and that becoming the focus of the game. It's about how we control, how we play, how we do things. What did we do at training? So this is the method that we want to put into the game. And more often than not, if you get that method and process right, the result should come as part of that. Rather than chasing the result, make sure your delivery and your way of playing is capable enough for your team. Then you should get the desired result as much as we want, because you can't tell me that children don't want to win as well. So that's what the sport comes down to. But ultimately, like it says there right at the end, if they don't have the functional skills to be able to do it, then it's a little bit redundant. If they can't pass the ball, then we don't want to do it. We can't really do playing out the back. If they can't strike the ball over a long distance, then we can't do clearing it from a goal kick. So if they can't kick the ball, then that stage is a little bit lost. And potentially, even if you have a group of 15-year-olds, the technical ability, you might still have them in the skill acquisition phase, but you might be able to add some more tactical stuff in it as you go along as well.
Yeah, just a great summary, Dan, of that. And then just to wind back just to the game training phase again, with regards to the players as individuals, I think it's very, very important, again, that players have opportunities to play across multiple positions and not be pigeonholed too early. This is definitely a case in both the skill acquisition phase and the game training phase. And again, you may actually, without getting too bogged down with the terminology in terms of BP, BPO, it's as simple as when we have the ball, when they have the ball, and the moments in between with regards to that transition. You only have to look at the Olyroos and the Matildas currently playing in the Olympics, and the Olyroos in particular against Argentina. Absolutely fantastic in actually making the most of their opportunities in transition moments, going from not having the ball to then having the ball, but quick counter attacks and being successful at that. And if you look at the last game against Spain, they played a very, very effective deep block when not in possession. They were able to sit in and stifle Spain for near on 80 minutes, which is an incredible challenge in itself to actually be able to do that. So then you can actually lead from, work on that and touch on that in the game training phase. But certainly when it comes to the pointy end, the performance phase, it is about winning at all costs. It's about getting the 3 points. It's about qualification. So how do you actually do that, and how effective are you in being able to do that? If you look at the game that the Olyroos in particular played the other night, they've currently got in that Olympic squad 19 players that are playing in La Liga versus the Olyroos that have 13 players playing in the A-League. And that's no disrespect to the players that are playing in the A-League, but the exposure that those Spanish players are actually getting on a week-to-week, month-to-month, season-to-season basis in terms of being in that one of the top leagues in the world, it is arming them not only with the tools as individuals, but understanding what their roles and responsibilities are within that particular phase to actually win matches within the La Liga environment. I think it's also important both in the game training phase and even in the performance phase when you get into there is looking at the players and what's the roles and responsibilities. I think as when you get into that performance phase, from an analytical point of view, from an analysis point of view, we don't watch enough football around the world. I think we can spend more time learning about what are the trends, what are the current systems of play, what's happening at the top level, and then what are the types of players you need to play at those levels. What are the tools that the players need in their toolbox? And if you wind it all the way back to the discovery phase and skill acquisition phase, you want them still to have fun in this phase. You still want them to enjoy the game. You still want them to go away from training. I can compare it to my time coaching in the NPL here in New South Wales. I had tradies that would work all day on a building site. I had players that were working in an office doing IT jobs, had a whole raft of other full-time jobs outside of football. But when they actually come into the NPL environment, they come to the training environment, that's their chance to get a release, for them to enjoy themselves, to actually do something that they really enjoy. So you have to still make it fun at this level, but there's a much more higher emphasis on that win, because it is about getting the 3 points and creating that environment where if the players understand exactly how you're going to operate, how you actually want your team to play, is it going to be a proactive brand of football? Are you going to base yourself on effective possession? Have you got players with a cutting edge that you're able to create and convert goal scoring opportunities? Or have you got more of a team that is defensively going to give you more because they're very good in the defensive moments versus what they are when you're attacking? So you might have to shift how you actually operate, how you actually play. But do you have a playing style? Do you understand with the cohort of players that you have from an individual perspective how they fit into your overall team collectively, and then how you're actually going to arm that team with the best opportunity to be successful in all of these main moments, depending on who you play. And then certainly from a performance level, you're pretty much looking at a structure whereby you're looking at past, potentially who you've played the week before, what's your training week looking like this weekend in preparation for who's coming up the week, the following week, and then structuring your week in that manner. So it's about that result at the end of the day and judging yourself on those successful outcomes in this particular phase. But fun all the way through. Just again, very quickly winding back to the game training phase, I would love to see in our environments more often coaches role modeling good practices. So if you look at players at the top level in the performance phase, what is it they're doing in the positions of those players? Are they setting it up where you have actually got good examples of fullbacks, good examples of number nines being able to pin and protect, being able to hold the ball up, bring players into the game, make runs off the shoulder, across the shoulder, whatever it may be. And video is a very, very powerful tool for players. I'm certainly that type of learner where I learn more by seeing pictures rather than words. And you have to understand that it doesn't matter what phase you're actually coaching in, every single individual is going to learn differently. So do you understand that environment that you're actually in? Do you understand what the needs and wants of the individuals are, and how you're going to give them not only the best experience from an individual point of view, but ensure you know exactly where their bar is depending on the age and stage that you're actually working in?
And the next phase that we've thrown in there is the social stage. So you won't see this one in the national curriculum, but this one is very grassroots suited. That you're over 35s, over 45, the rule age, whatever's that for us is the social stage, that potentially that team doesn't have a formal designated coach like we do with the under 10s. It might be a player coach, but you've still got the responsibility to to put something together for your Tuesday night training session or whatever it is. In terms of where they are, they're a combination of a couple of these age groups, of these phases. They're there to have fun, but they're there to win games. And I'm sure if you start trying to say something different, those over 35s and 45s will tell you something very different. They're definitely there to win the game on the weekend. But in terms of session design, my recommendation is actually that you keep it as similar to the skill acquisition phase in terms of session design and content. What changes is the language that you use, rather than depending on the players you've got. First and foremost, if you've got first-time players, parents come together to play in the over 35 lower division, they might still be actually learning how to control the ball. But if you've got a higher level of a social team, it still might be the same training session design, but your language and the communication that you as a coach or as a playing group, when you stop and talk about it, might not be about the quality of touch you had or what direction to do it. It might be more tactical. Hey, look, in this scenario, when we're outnumbered, can we play this way? Can we play that way? But in terms of how you design your session, my strong recommendation is almost copy the skill acquisition phase. And one of those reasons is not only the fitness level of players, that most of those players are there for one of their only run arounds of that week. So we want to keep them running a lot more, keep them active. The number of players you get training sessions, it goes up and down every week. You've got a squad of 22 players, but you're lucky to get 10. So it helps if you can build a session around having a smaller group. And then there's often a wide mix of ability within your squads as well. So making sure that you can try and lift that bottom up and still keep the top challenged, and using them as your role models within the team. And this is what we can do around here will really help to build your team going forwards and encourage that level of enjoyment throughout the season.
Yeah, I love that, Dan. Certainly that's where I'm at right now in my career, if you can call it that. And I was never a good trainer, that's for sure. I always look forward to the games, either midweek or at the weekend, and it's almost like you come full circle once you get into that social aspect. And I would go one step further to actually taking it to this level here, where that social aspect definitely becomes about the discovery phase again, because it's a bit of fitness. It is social. It's about enjoyment, again, getting together, and you can still get fit by having the football at your feet. And when you talk about that social aspect, it's beginning, middle, and end. It can be something as simple as, if you play smaller sided games, you get a lot more intensity in terms of football actions because of repetition, less space, less time. Which gives players, or gets players breathing, and the intensity is there. And then just taking it to something as simple as a 5v5, a 6v6, 7v7, or 8v8. Again, then players are now starting to work with bigger spaces and time. And like you say, you never know what numbers you're going to get when it's in that social aspect. Certainly with the discovery phase, it's exactly the same now in terms of those training components. And I have touched on this when we talked about the building blocks previously, but ensuring a player has a ball. The one thing I like to do in this particular phase is to actually ensure that a player has their own ball. I would like to see football start at home. I would like to see kids really be enthused at this particular age and falling in love with the game, with a highly participated sport in the country. But the door is open at the front, but unfortunately, the door is open at the back, and we lose a lot of players either to other codes, other sports, and that potentially is because of a bad experience that they've had as a player. So at these younger age groups, if we can really get them engaged and ensuring that they have a ball at their feet, even when they're not in our environment. So I encourage in this particular environment, I still thoroughly enjoy coaching this particular age group, is for the players to have their own ball and bring that to training, and giving them the challenge. If they're able to come to the training session with the ball and leave the training session with the same ball, their ball, that's a win in itself. But always adding challenge to it. So when you every player has that ball mastery, ball manipulation, space and time, again linking it back into those core skills that we talk about, running with the ball and first touch. Encourage that as often as possible, put that into your practices, make it big spaces, make it fun, make it enjoyable. And then when you get to the middle part, themed games, so you can have games within the games as well, which I like to do. So small-sided games where there is challenges, where players as individuals might have to do something, and you might give challenges to some different challenges to some players as to what you would other players, depending on the skill level as well, because it will be very mixed and very varied. And then at the end, just let them play, let them play the game. Chaos, football is chaos. Allow that chaos. Don't be afraid of that chaos. Don't feel as though you should be judged by the chaos. Embrace the chaos, if anything, and just allow the players to really explore for themselves and come up with solutions based on the environment that you're actually able to create within this particular phase. So moving out of the discovery phase and then going into that SAP phase, are you able? Yeah, so moving it on into that again. A similar sort of approach, just slightly different, and it's a skill introduction. Again, can the players have a ball at their feet? It doesn't necessarily have to be every single player with a ball at their feet. If you've got a theme or a topic that you're actually working on, a core skill, and that might be your first touch, you're striking the ball, don't be afraid to pair them up, to put them in threes, but lots of repetition to the skill introduction, ensuring that players are getting maximum opportunity to get touches on the ball. I like to see players have over 70% throughout the training session of opportunity to be touching the ball themselves, to be able to get in that repetition into their own individual techniques, etc. And then into that skill training, exactly the same thing as well. Can we play the football with theme games, enhancing the individual core skill? So an example might be that you might play a 4v4 in a slightly tight area, but you actually want to work on 1v1. So it might just be as simple as that you've got 2 1v1 end zones where players are already in there. It's basically the team in the middle gets the ball out to one of those end zones to create that 1v1 with potentially a shot on goal. It might be something as simple as that, but how you actually manage the session in terms of your organization and your setup, the distances, the sizes that you actually use is very, very important in this particular phase. And as part of your planning process, and we'll go into this a little bit later on as well, always plan to step up and step down. So give yourself the opportunity whereby if it is too easy, you have something in your mind within the session that you can change to make it more difficult. And conversely to that, if it is too difficult, you've got something in that session or that setup already there whereby you can actually pull it back and make it more basic until they start to get some success. And then you might start to build the levels up again. And most importantly, like we said, with all of these phases, play the game at the end. Let them play. If they're working hard for you, that's what they want to do. If we were to get kids themselves to actually come to our session and tell us, I want you to design a session, there's the equipment, tell me what you're going to do, guaranteed the majority of them would actually just set up a game and play the game. It's as simple as that. So try to be thinking about ensuring that we keep it as close to the game as possible in each of those components of a training session. And again, if we can do that, we're already winning, because the players will be engaged, they will be enjoying it, and they will be soaking it up like sponges, retaining the information, and hopefully at the weekend coming out and actually demonstrating that within that particular phase or within the training sessions that we're topping them up. And on each training session, we're starting to see a marked improvement by following this. And again, it doesn't have to be a skill intro, skill training, or skill game. You might start with the game, then you might do a bit of skill training, and you might finish with the game as well. So whatever works for you in the environment that you're in might be dictated by how much space you have available to you to be able to use. Give yourself that opportunity from a plan prepare point of view to do as many different sessions as possible, but always keeping it the game as close to its entirety as possible. So that the game training phase as well, and again, that skill acquisition phase, give the players the opportunity to play in a variety of different positions, even goalkeeper. I think it's very, very important. I think there's a tendency to pigeonhole players too early, putting them into situations whereby we're telling them that they're going to be a number 9, or they're going to be a holding midfielder, or they're going to be, etc. Give players the opportunity to actually test themselves in different positions and role model best practice as well. If we're seeing players, even with our Ollie Roos and our Matildas currently playing, if we can take some small examples from them, and then even on our tactics board or with our cones that we have, what's the type of movements that they're making, and try to role model those best practice situations in our practices. The current process, or the components that you would actually put in, would include passing practice, positioning games, and game training, which is the main teaching part, and then the training game at the end. But you have the freedom based on the environment that you're actually in. You have the freedom based on what the time constraints you may have, or the players that you have available to you, dependent on the age and stage that you're actually working with, to actually take one of these components out. You might start with that passing practice where every player has a ball, or they're in 1s or 2s. You're giving them an opportunity to get that repetition. You might remove that, and you might just go into some smaller sided games that I spoke to, with, especially with that social aspect as well, where it might be 5v3s, 4v4s, 3v2s, whatever it may be, but with a specific aspect or a theme that you're actually looking to achieve from the session, based on whether you have the ball. It might be that we want to be proactive in actually getting out of our half of the field, getting into the middle third, and then hopefully getting into the final third and creating and converting goal scoring opportunities. So whatever it may be, is it realistic? Is it relevant? And has it got lots of repetition? And I think those 3 R's are very, very key to me in terms of my process that I like to follow. So that's what you want. Does it have goals? Does it have direction? Is it realistic to what I'm hoping to achieve from the session? Is it the practice relevant? But most importantly, does it have lots of opportunity for the players to get touches on the ball, depending on what you want to achieve? And the other one that I like to use as well is that 5 Ws approach. So if you can go through that process itself, it's why are you doing it? So if you start with the why all the time, what and where on the field is it? So you've explained why you're doing something. What and where is it actually taking place? Is it taking place in the back third, the middle third, the front third? And who and when's going to actually give you the best opportunity to modify the practices, or give you a better chance of success, if you will? So the why, what, where, who, when is a great one for myself in terms of following a process, and then including those 3 R's that I've talked to earlier on. And there's a common theme with everything that we do, a game at the end. And another reason, or an important reason for having the game at the end, is it actually allows you to actually see how successful you've been in the plan and prepare, in terms of what you've planned, what you've prepared, but ultimately then you've gone out onto the field, you've conducted your training session. Now you're actually seeing, have the players actually taken on the information potentially that you've given? And we're starting to see modified player behavior. We're starting to see more successful outcomes. Players are starting to do the things that you're asking them to do. And you've done it in a way by where you're creating an environment that allows them to express themselves, but ultimately come up with solutions themselves. So we're not telling them, we're actually just, through clever Q&A, through clever session design, giving them the opportunity to explore and learn as individuals within the team environment.
Just something to add from myself in this one. Warren talked about a couple of times about rotating player positions. The other thing to think about in particular grassroots space is we often have quite a mix of ability within our squads, and typically our weaker players in our teams, we tend to pigeonhole towards the wider areas of the field, because we feel that's going to be less damage for the team, which is somewhat correct in it. And we also, on the other side of things, go, is that going to help them with a chance of success, because the game's not going to be so frantic and 360 degrees. I've only got to worry about half the team, and you're not going to be stuck in a 3v3 in midfield. You're going to be maybe a 1v1 out wide, so there might be a higher chance of success. But the other element to think about with that is, quite possibly next year they're going to be regraded. You might be the Div 1 team. Next year that player is going to be in the Div 2 team. Now, just because they've been a right back or a left back for you in Div 1, there's a very, very high chance that when they play next year in Div 2, that they're not going to be in that same position. And quite often, I've definitely experienced it in my playing career. At the lower levels, I was a striker and a centre midfielder. The higher the levels I went, I became a defender. So that sort of thing is going to happen as well, and we don't want to have players that they're a defender with you and that's it, and then they go and play in another team, and they're now a little bit behind the 8 ball. So making sure that they all have a decent understanding, not the same, not equal, but a decent sort of comprehension of, I could go and do a job at centre back or striker or midfielder because I kind of have a rough idea of it. And particularly if you're a centre back and you're playing against a striker, why not play as a striker 1 week and learn a couple of things of what they do? You might be able to find that you can stop it a little bit better.
I think it's not only that, Dan, it's also one, as the individual, understanding that they might play in that position, or they've got the opportunity to learn the skill set or the roles and responsibilities that's actually required to play in that position. But also it gives them a better understanding of a player that potentially is playing in that position, of what the challenges they're facing as well. I mean, I'll give an example right now whereby I watch a lot of boys' youth league games and girls' youth league games, and players have been pigeonholed into positions. And an example being, if you've got a winger, a wide player, if they're out on the wing and they're receiving the ball constantly out on the wing, they're actually only receiving pressure a lot of the time from in front or on the side, or one side, and they've got the touch line to them if they're high and wide, as an example, if they come on the inside. But if that player only does that from the ages 13, 14, 15, 16, they potentially have obviously been pigeonholed, but they don't, once they're asked to play in a different position, have any idea how to be able to do that or understand. If I'm now asked to play in a position in centre midfield where there's pressure coming from all different directions, where that pressure's coming from, so they're not scanning all the time, they're not looking over their shoulder, because potentially when they're out on the wing, they don't need to scan as much from behind because they've got the touch line and there's no space behind them. So they're just looking for where that touch line is, where if we challenge players and put them into different positions, they're starting to get a new skill set all the time, and being able to do that and understanding from what you're seeing that player do as an individual gives you an indication of where to actually place them. And I think it goes back to the point of one of the main reasons we tend to actually put players into positions too early is because we rely on them to do a job for us to win the game. So it's to serve our purposes, but is that actually developing the player as an individual, and hoping or understanding how we're actually, or getting a better understanding and education of how we actually judge success. And I think our role, it doesn't matter whether it's discovery phased all the way through to the performance phase, is to try and produce the next Socceroos or Matildas. So it doesn't matter what level we're working at, whether it's community, social, or it is more at the pointy end where it is about high performance. We all have a role to play, and if we can create environments that take these things into consideration, where the game is being played as often as possible, but you're giving players to play multiple positions, we'll stand a much better chance.
So the diagram everyone's seeing now is, if you look at that yellow arrow that goes across the screen, from when we first start our session to when we end our session, the general theme should be a gradual build-up of intensity. So you don't need to do a formal warm-up in a lot of occasions. If you're safe with what you do and how you conduct things, you're going to build that up and not go, right, we're doing sprints. Hang on, I've literally just put my bottle down and we're now doing sprints. We'll build into that, into active participation with lots of moving, lots of repetition of skills, and perhaps more random movements as well, where it's a little bit more chaotic. And then at the start of the training session, can we have a high ratio of balls per player? So it might be one ball each, or it might be one between two. And they're going to be consistent across all the age groups of players. I'm pretty certain if an over 35s, over 45s team go and train, they want to be kicking a ball. They don't want to just be doing running. So give them the ball, start off with the ball as much as you possibly can. And as we move through our session, it's going to get closer and closer to a game-like intensity, as it is over the weekend, and then hopefully try and keep it at that intensity, or maybe even slightly harder, so that then the game day becomes slightly easier. players are going to be making movements that are more game realistic, maybe less chaotic, more structured, potentially, depending on which stage or phase the players are within. And then ideally, by the time we get to the end, you're playing with one ball plus your spares. You're just playing a game, whether that's 11v11 or 8v8, or maybe it's 2 games of 4v4 or something like that. But you're going down to a position where it looks more like it does on the weekend. The pink, blue, and green lines you can see underneath, that relates back to the last couple of slides. So the discovery phase, we were looking at beginning, middle, and end, and they were roughly 3 equal splits of your training session. The skill act phase was your skill intro, your skill training, and your skill game. And you're probably looking at your skill training element being slightly bigger of that. And then if you're into your game training or performance phase, with the green at the bottom, your passing practice, your positioning game, your game training, and your training game at the end. But where that sits with you guys is up to you. You might decide this week, right, you're getting rid of positioning games, or you're doing more of them, or you're going to if you make one 5 minutes longer than the other one, no one's going to come down to you and say you're doing things wrong. And in many cases, why not just play a game? Quite often we can just play games, whether it's small-sided games or larger games. We can do that a little bit more often because, as we know, players like to play. You're going to get high engagement with that, right? Okay, we've got another video coming up here.
Hi, my name's Imogen and I'm here at the FA St George's Park to help grown-ups understand what it's like for us kids to play on pitches that are far too big for us. I've been playing football for 3 years now, and last year when I turned 11, I had to play on a full-size pitch. The goals were massive and the pitch was so big that only the biggest kids could keep up. Our goalie couldn't even kick the ball to the halfway line. Some of my friends stopped playing for the team and it just wasn't as fun. We're here today to see how grown-ups would feel on a pitch that felt this big. We're using a super-sized goal, which is the same size as if my keeper stood in an 11-a-side goal. The goal is this wide and this high.
A bit too big for me.
The FA have drawn out this pitch, which is the same for adults as it is for kids playing on a full-size pitch, so they understand what it's like for me to take a corner, which is all the way over there. We've got some kids coaches here today to play on the pitch and to see if they agree with us that we need to match kids' pitches to our size. And to give them a hand, we've got former England player Steve Hodge on the team. Let's have some fun. What was that?
Hey.
Oh dear. That was rubbish.
Bit tiring, isn't it? Too tiring for me.
What did you think then?
I thought that was very hard. It was kind of looking up and, where's my teammates? Where are they? Can't quite see them because they're so far away. And it was a big pitch and kicking the ball a long way was really hard work. So it wasn't that enjoyable, to be fair.
Just so big. The corners, I took a corner and didn't get anywhere near.
I felt like I was really lost on the pitch, you know. I didn't feel like I was part of the game.
What did you think then?
It was a wonderful experience, but opened my eyes. It's a very, very big goal, and I'm 6'3". I'm used to standing in front of a goal, but I found it very daunting.
Cold November morning, if you're stood at the other end of the pitch, it's, you know, that kid's not involved in the game. They're free.
Okay, so I think we all get the idea with that one. Obviously, that video from the English FA is not designed for a coaching space, but more about rules of the game and why we play small-sided for those younger age groups. But I thought it was really good just to show some concepts of what to think about with how we do training sessions and using our adult brain and how we see the game of football in comparison to how children see the game of football. And it leads itself nicely into session design. And a couple of things here where tips for coaches, I guess. And overall, is your session appropriate for what you've got? So is it age appropriate? Is it stage appropriate? And making sure that not just because the book says this or your session plan says this because you think this is the best, is it actually suiting what the players need in terms of their development and giving them the best step to go forwards, and making sure that it is as relevant as you can possibly make it in your space. So before you go and start designing training sessions, 3 tips from myself would be: make it age appropriate. So are you using language that is too complicated? So like before, where we had BP and BPO, when we've got the ball, when they've got the ball, make it nice and simple, so you don't have to re-educate them, you just come to their level. Are you trying to ask your 6-year-olds to play a passing combination through midfield and out wide and score a bicycle kick? Well, your 6-year-olds are lucky enough if they can make sure they're scoring the correct goal or stay in the confinements of the field. Then is it a trend or a one-off? So quite often I see a lot of coaches and have conversations with them about, we didn't win enough tackles today. We lost the 50-50s. Okay, now, are you really going to go and coach that? Because really that's an individual error or an individual skill deficit. So don't go telling everyone that you need to be better and stronger at the tackles. Actually go and teach that then in your component, the correct component of your training session, and give them the knowledge of how they can win tackles better. But is that a trend or is that a one-off? Is that just that game that was a one thing, or is it one player that's doing that? Because you're still a coach of a team. So you've got to provide your 1 or maybe 2, maybe 3 sessions in a week, depending on what space you're coaching within, that benefits all your players. Yes, individuals within your team, but you probably, in most grassroots spaces, don't have the time to be going and do a session that benefits one player, but not the other 12 players within your group. And if that's the case, well, you probably ask that player to stay back 10 or 15 minutes before and do some practice with them on the side, or something along those lines. So choose something that is a trend or rather than just a one-off. And then that kind of links into big problem or small problem. Is it really crucial with that problem or opportunity that has come through within your game? So the reason I've got that picture there is I have a number of conversations with coaches about throw-ins, particularly in the discovery phase and the early skill acquisition phase, because under 8s, first year they've ever had to do a throw-in, and they make foul throws all the time. But it's also age appropriate because that's a new biomechanical movement for them. But also the technical skill level of those players means the ball's out of play more in those age groups than it is in any other age group. They just can't keep the ball in that space, and it's all bouncing all over the place. So there's going to be throw-ins and there's going to be mistakes. In reality, have I seen many players at 8s and 9s that make regular foul throws or can't make a correct throw-in? By the time they're 20, are they still making foul throws? If they are, they're probably playing at the right level within grassroots football, because they've got other deficits within that. If they're going to go to the top end, if they're going to be a Matilda or a Socceroo, they would have self-corrected that one almost on their own, let alone with any other exposure they've had along the way. So yes, it might be a trend, and it might be a glaring problem that you see within your games, and something that your teams potentially need to learn, because it is still a skill, a throw-in. But is it really a big problem, or in the scheme of things, is it a small problem? There was actually a goal in the Premier League, English Premier League, scored last season by Leicester City off a foul throw. So on a grassroots, under 8s, under 9s, foul throws are pulled up all the time. By the time you get to the top level, you'll get away with them because they're not picked up, they're not even looked at. So in terms of a big problem, I don't think foul throws is a big problem. How I combat foul throws is when we play skill game or a game at the end of training session, just put throw-ins as your rule. When the ball goes out, it's a throw-in, not a kick-in. And then you can talk to the one player for 10 seconds when they've done an incorrect throw and correct it as you go within that. So designing your session. So now that you've sort of got a bit of a background as to the behind the scenes of what makes up your training sessions. Now we start to go into actually start to design it. So depending on what stage or what phase you're in is obviously going to dictate, and then the level of the playing group that you've got is going to dictate what content you're going to deliver. From this point on, we're going to assume the skill acquisition phase, and that was partly due to it being in the middle. So it's easy for discovery coaches to kind of scale it back, and it's easier for coaches in the older age groups to maybe tap on and make it a little bit harder. But also through the registration forms that you had completed, this was the most popular phase that most of the coaches seem to be working in. So it made most sense to cater for the masses here. So we're going to go through a bit of a standard skill acquisition phase training session. So what you go through within that is select your core skill. What core skill do you want to work on? And it's not just football and you're going to coach and everything. You're going to focus on one of these core skills as your main part of your session. However, as Warren said back before, that if it's football, it's probably going to encourage or have all 4 of these core skills happening at almost any time. The only time that it might not happen is if you're doing a true one-on-one game. It's less likely to have too much striking with the ball, possibly, but you're probably going to have all of them because it is football. Once you've selected your core skill that you want your training session to work on, then you choose a game moment and some that relates it to that game. So rather than say, right, we're going to do first touch and just let's practice controlling the ball, have a game moment within that. So there is some game learning. So today we're going to focus on our first touch, and with our first touch, we want to take the ball into open space. So it now gives the players a more tangible outcome of what is actually a good first touch. Because if I have a first touch that brings the ball under control and it doesn't balloon off my foot, but I'm getting tackled every time because I'm having a first touch that's, it's 30 centimeters away from my foot, but it's 30 centimeters away from the defender's foot as well. Versus if I have a first touch that's a meter in front of me, but there's no defender around me, or I touch it away from the defender, which one's the better touch? And I'll probably say the one that allows the player to keep the ball is the better touch, or the team to progress with the ball. So add that game scenario. The other good thing is not only can you allow these players now to have a more tangible game-like moment, but you can also relate to and observe the success of your coaching within that. Have these players, by the time you're at the end of the training session, are they taking a first touch that is into open space, or are they still taking it into the same area or getting tackled all the time? And there's obviously a couple of different scenarios that we came up with as just an examples, and you can pick and choose whatever that is from your observation of either games you've seen, oppositions you're going to come up with, or just your knowledge of your team. So, skill intro. This is my session that I've come up with here. You can see up at the top here, my core skill is first touch, and the game aspect I'm looking for is to control the ball away from my opponents towards space. Essentially, I'm going to do this activity here for 15 to 20 minutes. Every player starts with a ball. They need to dribble around in the area using different parts of their foot and avoiding the cones and avoiding other players. And we'll start off gradually and start to get a little bit more active and build that intensity as we go around. Then we've got other progressions within this. So coach could call out a color and the players have to dribble around the colors of the cones. So there's a few colors on the outside and within the session as well. I could instruct players to undertake different types of touches with the ball. So you might say, right, now it has to be with the inside or the outside, or the laces or rollovers, or different tricks that you need to have. And if you're not sure on what sort of other ball manipulation technique you can go with, we've got a video on our Hills Football YouTube page that will sort of show you some of those as well. Another common game I like to use is call out a number. So you might just call 3, and then the players need to get quickly into groups of 3. So it works on their quick decision making, but their perception to see where the space is, who needs to go here quickly, how can I be spreading my cells around and not isolating myself to the side or something like that. You've got change, so you have to swap balls. You can add a defender in later on as you've built your session up. So now it gives it more game realism that I'm moving the ball away from that opponent now, not just away from someone else or a cone. I've actually got a defender to go through. And then my coaching tips here, start off simple, add variations as we go. Don't blow through all of them in the first 2 minutes of your session. Try and make this one last 20 minutes and spread it over time. And don't coach it too much in this one. So just give individual comments as you need to. Hey, Sammy, come on, that should be a little bit faster. Hey, Steve, can you do this one a little bit, change the direction a little bit faster or more drastic? And then make sure that with this, the players are engaged with your coaching style and your language and your behavior, because that's where you really start for your training session and start to whether they're going to be active participants or whether they're going to tailor off and go through the motions. So can you really get them on board and make them feel enthused about their training session from there? Then into my skill training, which is the middle part of the game, which essentially is piggy in the middle. So still working on first touch. So I'm just creating a 3v1 in a relatively small area, and the area would size of the area would change depending on the number of players in the box, the ability level of the players as well, because you want to be able to have the 3 yellows have success at passing and controlling the ball, but you also want the blue to have success at trying to put them under pressure, because if it's done over by 50 by 50, great, that blue is going to have no success whatsoever and it's going to be unrealistic. So, but you don't want it to be in a 1-by-1, because great, nothing's going to happen. So you might have to play with your sizes as your session goes. Don't be afraid after 2 minutes. No, everyone pick up the cones, make it bigger, make it smaller as you need to. So the idea of the game is just the yellows play pig in the middle, keep the ball as long as they can. At the start, I have put in here that the defender would play for 60 to 90 seconds, and then we would swap the defender around, so that then I'm ensuring at the start of my session, everyone's getting relatively equal exposure to being defenders and players on the outside. And then the progression would be, once the defender wins the ball, that they swap over. And that's my progression later on. Because the thing you've got to be careful about is it's not unreasonable or unheard of that the player that is in the middle is often your weakest player, because they've given away the ball or had a bad touch or had a bad pass, so they spend more time in the middle. But if that's your weakest player, well, technically they should be one of the yellow players more than the blue, because they're the ones that are further behind. They need more practice, more repetition of their first touch and their passing. But you don't want to negatively reinforce it. Oh, you've given them a bad pass. Don't worry, you stay on the outside and someone else can go in the middle. So you've got to weigh it up. So how I do that is in my first half, I make it equal. It's just a rule. On my whistle, on my call, all defenders change, give them a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you make it more competitive as you go into the session later on. And then you might spend more time working with individuals. You might even group them, that you've got a better group and a weaker group, so that then it's more like for like, and you don't have them in as defenders the whole time. And you might expand your groups 4v2, make your area bigger, add more numbers. And some of the coaching points that we would have in this. Can I use, for the first touch, the inside of my foot? Can I have my first touch in the direction of my next pass? So in this example here, can player number 2 that's receiving the ball, could their first touch be in front of them, because they're probably going to play player number 3 here? So can they start to do that already before the defender can get across to put them under pressure, rather than keep the ball on this side where the defender is coming towards? When you're receiving the ball, can your body be open, and can you see all players within that field? So let's not have this player just facing the ball. Can we get him to twist him or her to twist their shoulders so they can see all 3 players in front of them? And then that gives them an easier opportunity to be able to play one of the 2 passes, and also makes it harder for the defender to read which one they're going to do, and probably, hopefully, take less touches or be more effective with their touches and passes and able to distribute the ball. Hopefully you can see that this session still, it comes back to first touch. and we're talking in our coaching tips around what part of the foot we're going to use and what we're going to do with that first touch. And then it still comes back to my game aspect around taking the ball away from the opponent. So how do I have that touch that goes there? So it is game-like for the players to take into when we go into the next stage, which is the skill game. So in this skill game, we were looking to make the field wider rather than longer in length, with a scoring zone in each end zone, with goals 2 on each side. So that can improve the options for players to be able to move the ball and improve their chances of scoring. This scoring zone that we had in here, the idea was, like we're shown in the diagram, that you had to play a pass into a player into here. So the encouragement was to make sure that we can move the ball into a space and we can get one of our teammates in a scoring zone, so that now they have to have a first touch that's going to set them up to score a goal. This player that's got the ball already, hopefully he's received the pass from someone, him or her, and now they're able to take a touch that leads them to pass the ball in that scenario. One other thing you might notice slightly different about this game here is I've got these 2 red players or orange players as well. So I've overloaded my numbers to ensure that whoever has the ball will have greater numbers on their team. And the hope with that is that then they've got more chance of having first touch and striking the ball repetitions, because they're going to have greater number of players. And should the Blues win the ball, then those 2 red players become on the blue team. So it's going to be 5 against 5 with the 2 extras. And then just every couple of minutes, I just make sure I rotate those 2 extras. Or you might have injured players that are just coming back from injury. Well, great, they might be able to go in there because they're going to get tackled a little bit less and they might have to do less running, and you can manage them in that scenario. You might even decide to put your goalkeeper in that position. Normally, your goalkeeper is less technically capable as your outfield player, so it's a good opportunity to get them in there in a less pressured environment. So if they do make a mistake, they're potentially not going to concede a goal straight away and build their confidence up as well, and still get them some exposure to playing as a player within the team. And then I've got some coaching points as well or some coaching tips that will relate back to the last part as well. And I talk about where my touch needs to go, what part of the foot I need to have, can my body be open? And now I'm just basically teaching everything I taught in the skill training, hopefully just reminding them exactly what we've already spoken about, now in a game context where there's more players across the field and it's more game-like. So on the weekend, when they go and play it on the game, they can then go and do it in a 9v9 or an 11v11 format rather than now a 5v5. And it's gradually grown up from having a ball per player into a 3v1, into a 7v5, and then on the weekend it goes into a 9v9. It's got a logical feel towards it. Players should feel comfortable and confident in their actions going forwards. Warren, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, that's a great session. And again, I look at these sessions and I'm always thinking, if we're looking to get the repetition, the relevance and the realism to the game, and this particular session is around first touch, what's the chain of learning? So there's a lot of detail there from Dan, which is fantastic, starting with that skill introduction into the skill training and a skill game. But if you look at from a plan and prepare point of view, and we will talk to this a little bit later, what the setup that you can actually see on the screen now, that setup should be what you use for the whole of the practice. And then if you can create that 3v1 within that practice there, that will make it a lot easier for you. I say this a lot of the time. If you set your session up where it's inside to out, so you always start with, ultimately you want to be picking cones up, not putting cones down or markers down or goals down. So if you have everything and you follow that chain of learning, we should be in a position whereby we're just picking all of the equipment up, and then it just ends with the game. And it might be right at the end that this game now moves into a more realistic game where it's not 4 goals, it's only 2 goals, as an example, and we might extend the end zones. Again, I talk to the step it up and step it down. depending on the age and stage that you're working with, it may be worthwhile to not even have the channels to start with. Just get them used to taking a first touch and putting the ball in the back of the net. Wherever they do that from, they can then make that decision. If they're getting lots of repetition and successfully getting the ball into the back of the net with that good first touch and then striking the ball after that, now we might put the zones in and make it a little bit more difficult. But you have the flexibility to be able to design those sessions the way that you want as well. I'll just look back to the skill introduction and to Dan's point around about throw-ins. There's no reason. We've got every single that has the ball and we're working on ball mastery. That's absolutely fantastic. But there's a great opportunity here through hidden learning to work on first touch if you actually put these players into pairs, one ball between two, and the service from the player on the ball is actually taking a throw in, and then the player receiving the ball takes a touch into space, whether it's around one of those yellow, green, blue, or red cones, whatever it may be. Something that, again, and you don't have to, there's no right or wrong, but something that I like to have in all parts of the practice is an opportunity to score a goal, because you want an outcome at the end. So if we're asking them to take a first touch and right at the end of the session, it's about taking that first touch and putting the ball in the net, maybe there is an opportunity to score a goal. So in here, there's no actual goals. So what is the goal? What's the challenge for the player? So is it that they take in that first touch around, they receive the ball, they take their first touch around the cone, and then they drive into that space? But there's that chain of learning there all the time. And then just on that middle part with the 3v1 in the middle, very, very important to rotate the players as quickly as possible. But also for that player in the middle, there needs to be a carrot. There needs to be something for them to keep them engaged. So potentially in this practice, and I'm just thinking out loud from actually seeing this session now, is that where you have got the three players, the one and then the two at the end zone there, it might be if the blue player actually wins the ball and there's a goal in that session, their objective is to take a good first touch and try and score against that player. And that will then keep them engaged, not only engaged to try and score a goal, but to really work hard to defend from a hidden learning point of view, to win the ball back, because they know they're going to get a chance to score a goal. And then when you get the rotation of players, they're still doing it. So, but even though the focus potentially is on the three yellow players, the blue player is really engaged. And even when one of those yellow players goes into that blue position, they know that they've got a challenge. Likewise, it might be for the yellow team is yes, it's a 3v1 and we have an overload, but there might be a goal at the other end. So then how do you actually, one, take your first touch, but recognizing at the end practice where it is about taking the first touch into an end zone, it might be that the player receives the ball as is in that picture, but the player on the other side is actually already breaking the line to take a first touch and scoring the ball into a goal, because that's what's going to come out in the game. So they're getting opportunities to get that repetition, they're getting the success, but because there's goals in the practice and ultimately the game is about scoring goals and not conceding goals, we're getting these hidden learning opportunities, which really gives the players lots and lots of repetition. They're engaged because they both sets of players, regardless of whether they're defending or attacking, they have challenge. They know that there's an objective, something that they have to do, and if they do it well, they'll get a reward for it. That will ultimately keep the players engaged as well. So there's so much you can do with this one particular session for all elements of the core skills, which is absolutely fantastic. But quite a basic session, and that's what's great about it as well, because you're able to manipulate it, you're able to keep a chain of learning that takes it all the way through. And I think that takes us quite nicely to that next slide, Dan, 23, of just ensuring that there is one model session. That's one type of session that you can actually do. If you've actually planned it to be a safe session, we talked about that area, starting with that end, that's going to be your end game. That's the space that you're actually working with. That's the equipment that you have. You know what the practice is going to be, and ensuring that you've now got it safe, it's organized, and then you can actually get a pre-planned session started really quickly. Certainly in the younger age group, I tend to see it quite a lot, where coaches will explain exactly what you're seeing in this picture here, which is probably more tailored to the game training phase, but even in the discovery phase and the skill acquisition phase, talking through what the session's going to be about. players will feel for the session. Just play the game, get the game going, just get them playing as quickly as possible, get them into the flow of the game. And especially as we get into those winter months, as the gentleman said in the video that we just watched previously, there's nothing worse that on a cold night that we've got a coach that's just talking to the players, telling them what the objective of the session is going to be, and then go out onto the park and explain exactly the same thing again, and the players haven't even touched the ball for 10 minutes. If we can get a session started within 2 minutes, get them out, get them playing, get them into that skill intro, and then again move them through each of the components session as quickly as possible, that will also keep them engaged. If you've got the progressions in there from a organization point of view, like I said, if you've actually set the session up where you're only taking cones away, you're not having to put cones down, that's going to make it a lot easier for you as well. And then also thinking about, how do I make it more difficult if it is too easy, and likewise if it is too easy, how do I make it harder as well? But you always have to start with the enjoyable part, make it fun. And so those points there are all the things that I've already talked about. Keep them engaged, give them a challenge. If you're looking for overloads, in particular in Dan's session at the end where he's playing the game, there's those two neutral players who end up creating the overload. It might be you set a game up on a side potentially of noughts and crosses. So every time a player scores a goal, they have to run to the side, and depending on what team you're on, you're either a nought or a cross. If you score the goal, you have to run off and put the cross on. And then what that does is all of a sudden you've got an overload. So whilst that player is also actually marking the cross, if the team are proactive and do it very, very quickly, they might be able to score a goal because the other team have got one less player. So that might be another opportunity. And if they do score that goal, that player, whoever scores it, has to run off and mark the nought. And likewise, now they're down. So you can get the different types of games if we're clever in how we actually set those games up with the rules that we actually put into practice. And there's so many different ways of doing it. But as long as we keep it safe, organized, keep it fun, keep it enjoyable, not just for the players, but yourself as well, that ultimately will keep the players engaged, but importantly, it will keep you engaged as well and keep you enthused to want to keep doing it, because you're starting to see modified player behavior for a really safe, organized, enjoyable environment. So as Dan said, you certainly in that discovery, and you will have seen this as well, as just considerations to make. A lot of the stuff we've already talked to tonight, but I think it's a really good illustration of how you can actually think about setting your session up, taking the so change it into consideration. We've talked again around the 3 R's, the relevance, the realism, and the repetition to a session, keeping it close to the game. And then the 5 W's, why are you actually doing it? What on the where is the field is it? In this particular session, it was about getting someone into an end goal to create and convert a goal scoring opportunity. Even though it's not potentially a game trainer or a performance-based session, it is going to be in the final third of the field. So if you can actually replicate that and you have the luxury to actually be doing it on that area of the field, even better. But going through each of these as well will certainly give you a real good chance of ensuring that you don't just plan and prepare a session really well, but you give yourself every single opportunity to conduct the session in a way. If you go through each of them very quickly, the one safe and the organized, we've already talked to the areas, the numbers, the rules, etc. But your coaching style is incredibly important. And again, from an individual perspective, how you actually deal with the individuals and what type of feedback you actually give, and try not to fall into the trap of always coaching the player that potentially is struggling. That might be an opportunity just for you to actually do a coaching on the run, not stop the whole session in front of them and make them inferior. And that will discourage them to be or want to actually express themselves with that no fear of failure. It might just be that you actually just go in and your coaching style is just to tap that player on the shoulder and just have a quiet word in their ear. And likewise, try not to always coach the best players or showcase or highlight success, highlight intent. If you can see a player has tried something, but they haven't potentially executed it very well, the fact that they've actually seen that pass or they've tried to actually take that first touch into an area, that's showing that they're aware, and the perception, decision making, and the perception and decision making is there, but the execution isn't quite there at that moment in time. So they're the considerations to make. But this is a great starting point for when you're sitting down and hopefully having a bit of time to plan a session, that you take yourself through this checklist, if you will. So change it. The 3 R's and the 5 W's will certainly put you on the right track to planning a good session, regardless of whether it's a discovery phase session or a performance phase session. I'll let you read this quote out and what it means to you, Dan.
So what it means to me is that too often I find as adults we want to tell children what to do, and I'm guilty of that with my own children, telling them explicitly, do this, do this, do this, and particularly with sport. Why did I enjoy playing football when I was young? Because I just got to be me, and I just got to play. So sometimes best sessions planned out and what you're going to say and everything, but sometimes just have a think, do I need to intervene with that one? Do I need to stop it? Sometimes it is better that they made a mistake. And I think there's many cases or examples we could come up with players that, or individuals that have learnt best from their mistakes. Or how many times would you have seen certain people go, don't do that because it'll hurt yourself. 5 minutes later, they're going and trying to do it anyway. I definitely was of that when I was a child. Don't climb that tree in case you fall off it. And I was up the tree. I was on the roof trying to get the ball back instead of waiting for dad to come with the ladder or something. So sometimes kids will be kids and they'll make mistakes, but quite often the mistake will be more powerful with a natural consequence than it will be you telling them. And in many cases, we're probably coaching a team with our own son or daughter within the team, and they don't listen to you at home. So why are they going to listen to you when they're out in the football field? Sometimes just let the natural scenario take fold, and you can go, what happened in that scenario? What can you do better, rather than maybe giving them the answer as well? What did you learn from that, and see what they take away? And you've got to find that fine balance. There's too often where we can be as coaches, there's an error, there's an error, there's an error, there's an error, and we end up jumping in all the time. Pick and choose with your balance.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with that, and it is something that has become more and more prevalent. And Dan's actually just talked to a positive experience growing up and being in an environment where he had the freedom to make mistakes, explore, have that no fear of failure. But too often we see quite the opposite, where players are judged because they failed or they've made a mistake, where we should be encouraging that. And certainly from a discovery phase and skill acquisition phase, I think some of the best sessions I've actually seen are whereby they've been organized to the point where there's minimal interventions, because they've been clever with a session design. They've been clever with how they've actually put the session together, allowed the flow of the session, and then pick their moments to actually set a task, observe whether that task is actually being done, and then picking the moments just to intervene and when to stop it, but get in there and get out. And certainly at that discovery phase and skill acquisition phase, try not to go in all the time, try to keep the flow to the session. And we're very, very quick to blame the players when they make mistakes. But one of the most important things, I think, once we've actually conducted the session, is on the drive home, is evaluate your own performance as well. So it might be something that you've done in your session design that hasn't actually worked because of a rule or a constraint that you've actually put in place. So try not to blame the players first. Have a look at, was there something or a slight modification? And it may only be very, very small, something that I need to do to take that session to the next level the next time round. And the other thing is as well, is that if you can try and keep the sessions quite similar, and the players understand the rules and the players understand what the components are to each of the session, they then start to become in tune that they know what's coming up. So they're not having to learn a new practice. It's taken 10, 15 minutes to learn the practice. They know the practice, they're familiar with the practice. You might slightly change it, but keep it quite similar. And I find that certainly in that discovery phase, where it's more games based, and then in the skill acquisition phase, if you keep the sessions quite similar, you can do that same session that Dan's just shown you there. You can do that for every single core skill. As you will have seen as he's moved throughout each of the components of that session, you can do first touch, striking the ball, running with the ball, and 1v1. How you actually organize it, set it up with distances, give yourself the best opportunity to not have to go in and intervene all the time, and allow the flow to the session. And hopefully the players will start to come up with solutions themselves. And then what you'll also find is, if they're not coming up with solutions themselves, if you create the right environment, the players around them will start to support each other, as well as to potentially what they can do to come up with better outcomes, more successful outcomes, etc. So yeah, fantastic quote, Dan.
So summary, we're coming right to the end of the session. So KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Make sure you know what you're going to do, know what core skill, you know what sort of game aspect that you want to bring that into, give it a bit of game relevance, and then just go and coach that and make that come alive, be that through the player behaviors and the player actions. Don't try and coach the entire game. Don't try and make it more complicated than it needs to be. If we start it off relatively basic and the players have nailed it and they've done better than you expected, well, then you might need to improvise, but you can also ask them, how can we make this harder now? What rules could we possibly change? And you could give them some ownership within their training session as well. But essentially, try and make sure it looks very different to the diagram, the picture that's seen to the side of that, with lines and arrows and shapes going all over the place, because who's going to know what means? Who knows what they're doing? So if they can be really good at one or two things rather than half competent at 20 things, you're probably going to be able to have some better development and better success within that and progress as we go forwards from there. So we've got some extra resources for you to use going forward. So Hills Football website has policies and competition regulations. Facebook has the news and events. We have a Facebook group for Hills Coaches Hub, where we put some content in there, session plans and things a bit specific. Playfootball.com.au that has a lot of resources in there for you with session plans, other webinars, documents like the national curriculum, plenty of things up there for you to get into. And then we also have the Hills Football YouTube page as well, which has a how-to series around a number of different parts of the game: ball manipulation, skills, tricks, turns, and other sessions. And every now and again I do a model session out in the grass and throw it up there as well. So lots of places for you to be able to get some content. And webinar number 3, so next week, the core skills, what should we be developing? So what we're going to do from that is we're going to break down essentially what we've done today into a little bit more depth around what actually those core skills look like in terms of real life scenarios, not just now from a piece of paper. And that brings us to the end of our webinar. So would like to thank everyone for jumping on, being part of it this evening, and spending an hour and a half listening to myself and Warren witter on about football, because we could do that as long as we possibly wanted to. And thanks to Warren for spending some time with us and sharing some knowledge and giving some insight, and not have the listeners just have to listen to me the whole time. Gives it a good voice to break it up in some different perspective.
No, absolute pleasure. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I've just looked at the chat there as well, Dan, so I'm happy to answer those questions now if you would like me to. Or
yep, I'll take off the share and stop the record.
So I think the first one was from Audra. Apologies if I've pronounced your name wrong. Any tips on how effectively extend training to at-home sessions